Hello, everybody. It is the season to be thinking about microdochium. So what I thought we'd do is just put together a short video just with myself and Glenn, just talking about the microdochium Greencast model. So it's something that's been around for a long time, if I'm not mistaken, Glenn, and it's got some really interesting data in there, but we just wanted to kind of clarify what it can do, what it can't do, and where we see that people can get more use out of it, or where people shouldn't be using it. So some interesting stuff in there to dig into.
Yeah, the Greencast Microdochium model has been about, I think, since about 2005. It was developed by Dr. Carl Danneberger out in the USA and validated at STRI. And for a long time, it was kind of the standard. Well, it still is the best model in the market. It's the model that's been used by people, and it's been on our website for ages. But like you say, we're now using it in a slightly different way. We're using it in Turf Advisor. And the way Turf Advisor is set up allows us to look forward, backwards, and understand these things much better than we have had before. So same model, nothing new, but we're just looking at it in a different way now.
Nice.
Great. So this is how it's set up, Sean. This is what goes on in the background. Just a very basic chart to try and explain what the deal is. So it's a temperature model. So what we're looking for is the optimum temperature for microdochium patch according to the model and associating that with a number. So in this situation, 0, it means very little pressure, or if you get anything, very little damage. 1 shows that we might see some damage. And what you can start to see here, Sean, is this is the temperature on the bottom axis.
Yeah.
And then this is the score up here. So these zeros, if we've got an average temperature today of 21 degrees, then the microdochium patch model would issue a score of 0. Equally, if you've got an average temperature of 7 degrees, then the microdochium model will issue a score of 4. And it really is as simple as that. There's no magic there. There's not lots of metrics being pulled in. It isn't some super intelligent piece of software that's trying to work this out. It's just a simple temperature related score.
And 4 is straight up as high as you can go, isn't it? So 0 is the lowest, and 4 is, there's no 5, there's no secret 6, it's just 4
So
is
that's
top.
correct.
Yep.
So if you see a 4, that is, according to this model, the worst situation you can have for disease. Now, there's some things to take into account. This doesn't take into account any leaf moisture, any humidity. It does take rain into account. Now, when they put it together, there were very few model or very few metrics that could be pulled in. So to drive the moisture part of it, the model requests there are 3 of the last 6 days that have had rainfall.
Okay,
Now
so
that
before we
makes it
even
quite
talk about temperature, rainfall's got to be there.
Yeah.
So if we're looking at the perfect temperature, but there's no
Yeah,
rainfall, it's like flat. There's no pressure in theory.
that's it. Yeah, yeah. So it's we've got to have had that rainfall. Now, I understand why they put it in. I suspect as we look at this and we use it more and we interact with it on a daily basis, we will start improving this model. And I think we'll probably pull that part of it out. Of course, we'll let everybody know when we do it. We might even set them up as 2 models. We'll see how that goes. But we're just kind of waiting on feedback. And that's part of today's session, is just to have a chat about what we've seen, how we're using it, and maybe how I would guide people on using it in the future.
Because moisture is a strange one, because it's obviously such an important part of the equation that you can't have fungal growth without some degree of moisture. But like you say, that can come in the form of humidity or leaf wetness or irrigation if you're in the warm season, or the amount of rain you've had. So 2 rain events aren't equal, and this is where there's so many different parameters that come into it. And obviously you can't just have everything brought into a model and have it validated. It just takes a long time to do that process, doesn't it?
Yeah, when this was put together maybe 16 years ago, 17 years ago, the weather data wasn't there to pull that into computing models. It was very simple data that was available to us. We had temperature, we had rainfall, that was pretty much it, possibly a little bit on cloud cover. Now, what we've done with Turf Advisory, we've simply picked up the models that people have been using and they're really used to, and we've dropped them into a more usable format. Now they're more usable, we can start to improve and develop them, and that's our plan. So what it's telling us at the moment, Sean, is because we've just dropped off quite cold where I am down on the south coast, and let's have a little look at it. So this is what the app is telling us at the moment. if we go into that Greencast model, and I look at my location here in Winchester, we can see today, Monday the 27th, I am at 0, so I'm low pressure. So if we have a look at that, what that means is I'm averaging around the kind of 1 to 2 degrees today. I'm cold enough for there to be no microdochium pressure. But if we look backwards, so if we start looking at last week, we can see that I was in a run of reasonable pressure. I was 2, 3, 4, 2, 4. So we were kind of jumping around these temperatures last week. I was kind of, would have been 4, 5, 7, 8, 9. So that's where I was sitting. Back end of last week, excuse me, what am I doing? There we go. That's where I was sitting back end of last week. And as we start to move forward, the cold weather kicks in, so we drop down to this end of the spectrum. And then when I get to Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, we start picking back up again. We'll start going into these 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 degrees. So we start moving back into here. Now, what I've learned, when I put this on, I was expecting it to start highlighting some spikes for me, because when we've looked at it retrospectively, it's been really accurate at showing when the disease pressure periods were.
Yeah.
So the expectation would be that once we give you the data to look forward, it will be really accurate at picking out when that disease kicks in. But that hasn't really proven to be the case. And in hindsight, I'm not surprised either, because all it's doing is looking at a temperature. It's not taking all those other things into account. But what's important to think about here is as we move into December, because as we record this, it's right at the back end of November, we are going to be floating around these 2, 3s and 4s all month. So we are going to be working temperature-wise over
it.
Yeah, we're going to be down at this end, bottom. So it's going to be kind of best case scenario. We'll get up to 9s, 10s, 11 degrees as our average temperature for the day. So we're going to be in 3s. We're likely to be in these 4s. And our best case scenario is we get down into these cold temperatures. We're not going to get into these higher temperatures to go into recovery period now, probably until April or May next year. So what this is now doing for me, Sean, rather than highlighting, oh, look at the back end of next week, we've got some high numbers coming, it's not telling me that I'm going to get a spike of disease. What it's telling me is if I get disease at the back end of next week, that is going to be really damaging, because I'm banging this awkward period where I'm not going to get recovery for a while. My best case is the 0s, which are just stopping temperatures. Back to that concept myself and Henry talk about of those sub 2 degree hours.
Yeah.
But they're no for recovery if we've lost grass cover. So it's really important the next 4 weeks, next 4 or 5 weeks as we go into Christmas and into the new year, that we really keep on top of our game here to make sure, because it's highlighting how damaging that is. I think one of the other really useful things to look at is this 2-week average. So although we're in a period of high pressure, this is completely normal. So we're averaging for this 2-week period 2.4 on this Greencast model. And our average for this period of the year is 2.8. Now that will be made up of different things. This year it's been made up, this 2-week is made up of a week block of pressure last week, and then 5 days of cold stopping temperatures, and then back into another 4-day break. So it's just how that is delivered. But I guess the dangerous run is when we're in these runs of 4 or 5 days, all in those 3s and 4s. What we can tell from this is at least we've got a bit of a respite Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday this week, and then we'll start moving forward. But it's going to be critical that we stay on top of that.
And I think for me, those averages are going to be really useful for course managers, because you can look at it and you can say, well, am I worse than it's historically been now? Like, it's feeling bad out there, but actually, is it worse than it has been before? And that's a really, really quick, easy way to look at that, to say, look, I'm at 2.4, actually slightly less pressure than we would have been seeing historically at this time of year.
Yeah,
but it's
that's
all on the
right.
averages, isn't it? So yeah, like you say, it hides the details a little bit, but yeah.
Yeah, it really does, because that's, like we say, purely temperature related. It's not taking in all the other factors that are going on, and there's such a dynamic and fluid place on a golf course. And we've had so much rain this year, which on one hand has meant we're really, really wet. But on the other hand, I haven't seen the same amount of microdochium patch around as I would normally expect in these periods, because that moisture has been running that pathogen off the leaf. It's been really difficult for it to get established. So we have been really wet. The model has probably highlighted a higher disease pressure than we've actually had, because it's not been perfect conditions for it. It's much better if we've got long periods of dew for disease to develop than long periods of rain. So, take it for what it is. It is not perfect, but that is exactly why this is such an important app, because I'm not really looking at Greencast Microdochium model to steer me on, am I going to get that spike in disease? I'm looking at things like soil temperature. So whilst we are cold, if you look at the soil temperature through last week, we had soil temperatures up around 10 degrees last week, which is going to be really, really good for disease to get going.
Yeah.
But actually, if we look at what's going on, so although we're into that bit of a spike at the back end of next week, according to the model, those soil temperatures are still staying low, which will happen more and more now. So that kind of steers me to think, from a soil temperature point of view, we're not perfectly into it. We're about average for this time of year. So soil temperature is a useful metric to look at. Leaf wetness is a really interesting one to be looking at. You can see all through last week, we were up fairly high, 30s, 60s, 50s. But if we look forward, what's going on? Well, so soil temperature might not be the big driver, but it looks like we've got loads of leaf wetness going on at the back end of next week. So that could be a signal for us to get into some really good maintenance practices, some good cultural practices, and maybe dew suppressants if we get dry days. If we look at today, we're 13 hours above 40%. If we start looking into Thursday, 17 hours above 40%, Friday, 24 hours. So what's really important to look at here is just how long a block that's going to be without any break in leaf wetness. So that starts to worry me a bit more, and you start to weigh up all these different parts of it. Now, from a leaf wetness point of view, we are about 10% wetter than we would be normally through this period of the year. So whilst microdochium model is picking out average, soil temperature are a little bit lower, leaf wetness is a little bit higher. So this is why it's so complicated, and it's never going to replace turf managers. They're going to have to make the decisions, but if we can give them better data, then that's really important. Humidity is a big factor, and you can see we're into skyrocket high humidity for this time of year. But again, all perfectly average. That's why November and December is such a difficult period to manage disease. And what else would I be looking at as well? And
I think it's
obviously,
really important what you highlight, though, isn't it? That no matter how good we make these models, and there's still more work to be done, it's never going to be one-stop shop. You're going to have to look at those soil temperatures, look at that leaf wetness. It's these things come together, don't they? Because, like you say, we looked at 3 metrics there. 2 of them look perfectly normal, and then it's only the leaf moisture that gave us a hint that actually that could be quite a bad period for the disease. So yeah, it's looking at those things together in conjunction.
Yeah. I mean, the temperature, looking at the air temperature, it does drop right down for next week. So that's our saving grace. We've got really high leaf wetness. We've got really high humidity. The only thing stopping microdochium patch ramping away back end of this week is those temperatures. Now, this is forecasted, so it could well spike and go up, or it could well go down. But that is what you want to be looking at. You want to be piecing that jigsaw puzzle together to try and work out what's right for you. Personally, I wouldn't look at this Greencast model, this microdochium model, as the be all and end all at all. It's simply an indication of, if we get some problems, how damaging is it at this time of year.
Yeah, and that's the key to it, isn't it? It's not, a 4 is not saying you will 100% get microdochium. And we've had feedback from users about that, saying, right, I'm a 4, but I'm seeing no disease. If you've got a really good, ITM plan in place and you've got a 4, then you might not see any disease at all. It's not guaranteeing you're seeing disease. It's just saying if you see disease at this time, it's going to be more damaging than at other times. And we can sort of dig into the reasons for that over these next few slides, because I think it shows it really nicely.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, because it's looking at it this way has been the first time I've been able to do it this year. And I was looking at those early periods through September and October and thinking, why isn't it showing 4s? Why isn't it doing this? And all it was telling me is, am I starting to move into that optimum period, as I started to see those 1s and those 2s appearing, that meant we're moving into a period where we start to see this ramp up. It wasn't telling me I'm going to see disease, and now I understand that better. It's going to help me guide my strategy next year much, much better. Okay, so yeah, I wanted to look at this with you. So this is how the scores are allocated, as we pointed out earlier. If you're in a temperature of 6, 7, 8, 9, that kind of region, you're scoring 4. So the model is saying that's the most dangerous time. But I would challenge that a little bit, because I don't think that's when microdochium is its most active.
Yeah.
There we go. So what I've done on this slide is I've overlaid what I think, and it's purely my assumption based on working in the UK for a number of years and looking at disease development. I think this is when you'll see the disease at its most active. So whilst the model is pulling things out at kind of temperatures of 6, 7, 8, 9, I would say an optimum period for it is when we've got an average temperature of around 10 degrees. So that's when the pathogen, that's when you kind of come in the morning, if you've had overnight temperatures at 10, and you can see loads of white mycelium there, you can see it's really moved forward. But that's quite different to what the model is pointing out.
And it's quite an interesting one, that actually, isn't it? That yeah, your fungus is actually happier at that warmer temperature. It's going to be pushing faster there, so that's not the full story. That's why the model's more complicated.
Yeah, and I think that's how Dr. Danneberger pulled this all together. He was looking at this combination of when is the disease at its most active and when is the plant at its most vulnerable. So that's what we're looking at here. This green line that I've put in is the growth potential line. So if we start looking at temperatures along the bottom again, what it's showing us is at around 20 degrees. When we get a day that's averaging around 20 degrees, that is when cool season grasses out there are at their optimum growing. They're at their in their best condition. They're in their best defenses up to fight any fungal attacks. But what we can see quite quickly is when it drops off down to those lower temperatures, we lose a lot of growth. And there's nothing new here. Turf managers know this. Once the temperatures drop below 6 degrees, then our growth drops off to pretty much nothing. So we can see here, let's see if I can get my laser pointer on here. There we go. So at these low temperatures, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we've got very little growth going on at all. So all the time we're down here, the plant just simply cannot defend itself against any attack. Once we're up here, we're moving into reasonable growth of these kind of 20% onwards at 10, 11, 12, then the chances are the plant will defend itself quite happily. So if we then start overlaying the two, we've got our model, we've got our growth potential, and we've got our microdochium patch pressure. We've got our highest pressure here, and we start moving into a plant that just cannot defend itself through here. Hence why he's blocked off this chunk as the highest and worst pressure. So I think if I go back to what he was trying to achieve with this, what he was trying to point out is this period, 5, 6, 7, 8, is when your pathogen is still pretty damn active, but your grass plant is just not capable of defending itself. And because you are so close at this end of the scale to these cold temperatures, that is when you're not going to see recovery. So looking at the model now, understanding how to use it, I would definitely use it to shape my strategy. It's really important to get on top of things early when we start moving into those 1s, 2s. But our 3s and our 4s is absolutely critical to get it right, because this period, back end of November, December, probably the first week of January, are when this can be its most devastating. That doesn't necessarily mean fungicides. It could mean better dew removal. It could mean lifting cutting heights. It could mean less mowing. It might mean better nutrition programs. It might mean dew suppressants. But there's a good chance in there we're going to need to be timing some well-timed fungicides around those high humidity, optimum temperatures, long leaf wetness days. And the app will help us piece all of that together. It's one big piece. It's not just one model we need to look at.
Yeah, no, that's really nice, because I think of it unjoined up, and it's really important to see it all together like that, that actually the Microdochium would be really happy at 15 degrees, but at that temperature your grass is going to be growing pretty well and you're going to get kind of recovery and your grass is going to be healthy and able to fight it off. So yeah, the fact that it's got to be those kind of things all coming together, it's leading to the most dangerous scenario, which is you get damage but you're not able to grow out and you're not able to recover from it, and that's why the bars are not joining up. So that's why those reds are so low and hard there, because yeah, you're not getting any turf response in that situation. So any damage you get dealt is going to stay with you, and it's going to be a lot more damaging longer term.
That's right, and that's why spring disease management is a very different strategy to autumn one, Sean. Because if we think about kind of September and October, well, through September and October, we're on our way downwards. So we're kind of, our temperatures are dropping, so we're moving into pressure, we're moving further away from this growth potential, and we're moving more into high disease pressure, knowing that we've got a long time at these cold temperatures before we recover. Whereas when we think about spring recovery, we still got the same temperatures going on, but we're going this way. So we start moving up the curve, we start moving back into growth potential. So I'm always talking about really robust autumn fungicide programs and management strategies, because as we go into the winter, we lose that growth. But the time to relax a bit more is going to be through that April, May period when we come back out the other side, because then you know this growth potential is back on its way back up in order to recover any damage that you've got then. So this autumn period is really hard. And if we think about our timelines, this is probably September, where I'm raising here. This is probably October. We've gone into November, and now we're moving into December. We start moving this way. And as we come back out of this in the spring, we stay down here for much longer, and then we jump quite quickly into these in April, May period. Just a difficult time of the year, Sean, and we've got a lot to keep an eye on at the moment.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much for that, Glenn. It's obviously a lot to dig into, but yeah, it's good to see people starting to use the models, and there's a lot of useful information in there. It's just knowing kind of the limits to that, that it's not the be all and end all that you're at for, but it's just getting your eyes open and thinking, right, there's potential for huge damage here, so let's start monitoring those other factors as well. So it can kind of be a quick ready reckoner, I think, but also then you want to start managing those other metrics that kind of come in to make pressure.
That's the one. Brilliant. Right. Thanks, Sean.
Thanks very much.